In the peaceful and scenic town of Carmel by the Sea, California, there lived a man who was known to everyone but seen by few. Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor and filmmaker, had made this quiet coastal town his home for years. People admired him not just for his iconic roles in movies but also for his calm and private lifestyle. He wasn't someone who liked being in the limelight all the time, but every now and then, he would step out into the public eye, usually for something meaningful or close to his heart. One such occasion came early in 2024, when Clint decided to attend an interfaith dialogue event held at a local community center. It wasn't a flashy Hollywood gathering. It was a simple, thoughtful meeting where people from different religions came together to talk about unity, understanding, and how faith could bring humanity closer. The room buzzed with energy as rabbis, imams, pastors, and other spiritual leaders shared their thoughts. Everyone seemed eager to listen and learn. Clint sat quietly in the front row, observing everything around him. He wasn't there to speak. He was there to hear. As the discussions unfolded, one person caught his attention, a man whose presence felt different from the rest. This individual wasn't loud or trying to dominate the conversation. Instead, he spoke softly, but with immense conviction. His name was Archbishop Robert Prevost, a Catholic leader who had spent much of his life working among the poor and forgotten in South America. Archbishop Prevost didn't look like your typical high-ranking church official. There were no fancy robes or grand gestures, just a humble demeanor that drew people in. When it was his turn to speak, he talked passionately about the need for change within the church. He believed that outdated traditions should make way for more compassion and inclusivity. He emphasized the importance of listening to the voices of those who often went unheard, the marginalized, the oppressed, and the struggling. As the event wrapped up, Clint found himself intrigued. Something about Archbishop Prevost's words lingered in his mind. So instead of leaving right away, Clint approached the Archbishop after the session ended. They stood near a small table filled with coffee cups and pastries, exchanging pleasantries before diving deeper into conversation. The two men couldn't have been more different on the surface. One was a rugged Hollywood legend known for tough guy roles, while the other was a soft-spoken clergyman devoted to serving others. Yet they connected instantly. Clint listened intently as Archbishop Prevost spoke about his dreams for the future. He wanted to see a church that wasn't afraid to adapt, to grow, and to face its mistakes head-on. He believed that true faith meant action, not just words. At one point, Clint leaned back slightly, studying the Archbishop with his piercing gaze. Then, almost as if struck by inspiration, he said something unexpected. With his signature confidence and gravelly voice, Clint remarked, "You know what? I think you're going places. Mark my words, if there's anyone who can shake things up and change the face of the church, it's you." The comment hung in the air for a moment. Archbishop Prevost smiled warmly, clearly touched by the compliment, but neither of them thought much of it beyond that. After all, it was just a casual remark made during a friendly chat. Little did they realize that these words would soon take on a life of their own. For Clint, it was simply a gut feeling, an instinctive reaction to meeting someone who radiated authenticity and purpose. For Archbishop Prevost, it was a kind gesture, from a respected figure, nothing more. Neither of them could foresee how fate would weave their paths together in ways neither could imagine, and so the day ended quietly, with both men returning to their respective worlds, unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. But as history has shown us time and again, sometimes the smallest moments hold the biggest surprises. What started as a brief encounter between two very different individuals would eventually become a story that captivated millions and left the world wondering if Clint Eastwood might just have a knack for predicting the future. Months rolled by after that quiet meeting between Clint Eastwood and Archbishop Robert Prevost, and life seemed to return to its usual rhythm for both men. Clint went back to his peaceful existence in Carmel by the Sea, occasionally spotted driving his old truck through town or walking along the beach at sunset. Archbishop Prevost, on the other hand, continued his work with the same dedication he had always shown, traveling to remote villages, speaking at small gatherings, and quietly advocating for change within the church. But then, something extraordinary happened, something no one saw coming. News broke across the globe that sent shockwaves through every corner of the world. Archbishop Robert Prevost had been elected as the new pope. The announcement came like a bolt out of the blue. No one expected him to rise to such a position. He wasn't a household name, nor was he someone who fit the mold of what people typically imagined when they thought of a pope. Yet here he was, standing on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, dressed in white robes, waving humbly to the cheering crowds below. Taking the name Pope Robert I, he became the leader of over 1 billion Catholics worldwide. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Social media lit up with reactions from believers and skeptics alike. Some were thrilled by the choice, praising the Vatican for selecting someone so grounded and compassionate. Others were skeptical, questioning whether this relatively unknown figure could handle the immense responsibilities of the papacy. Amidst all the chatter, one name kept popping: Clint Eastwood. It didn't take long for videos and articles about Clint's earlier remarks to resurface online. Clips from the interfaith event showed him confidently predicting that Archbishop Prevost would change the face of the church. At first it seemed like just another quirky coincidence, a Hollywood legend making an offhand comment that turned out to be eerily accurate. But as more people dug into the story, curiosity grew. Had Clint somehow known? Was it really just luck, or was there something deeper at play? For many, the timing felt too perfect to ignore. Here was a man known for his tough guy roles and no-nonsense attitude, suddenly sounding like a modern-day prophet. People began sharing memes and jokes online, blending humor with genuine awe. One popular image showed Clint tipping his cowboy hat with the caption, "Even I didn't think I'd call it this well." Another featured a screenshot of his prediction with the words, "Clint Eastwood action star and fortune teller?" As the buzz intensified, journalists scrambled to piece together the full story. They reached out to attendees of the interfaith event, asking if anyone else had noticed anything unusual about Clint's interaction with Archbishop Prevost. Most said it had seemed like a normal conversation, nothing particularly remarkable. But a few recalled how Clint had leaned in intently during their chat, his trademark squint focused entirely on the Archbishop. It was clear he had been paying close attention, even if he didn't let on at the time. Meanwhile, Clint himself remained characteristically low-key about the whole thing. When reporters tracked him down for comments, he shrugged it off with his usual dry wit. "I've seen a lot of things in my life," he told one interviewer. "Sometimes you meet someone and you just get a feeling. That's all it was, feeling." Still, not everyone was convinced. Skeptics argued that Clint's prediction was being blown out of proportion. After all, plenty of people probably made similar comments about Archbishop Prevost before his election. Why should Clint's remark carry any special weight? To them, it was nothing more than a lucky guess amplified by hindsight. But for millions of others, it wasn't about logic. It was about hope. In a world filled with uncertainty, there was something comforting about the idea that even a legendary actor might have insight into divine plans. For believers, it added a layer of mystique to Pope Robert's rise to power. And for non-believers, it was simply an intriguing twist in an already fascinating story. As the days passed, the excitement only grew. News outlets ran segments analyzing Clint's career alongside Pope Robert's journey, highlighting the unlikely parallels between the two men. Both had risen from humble beginnings, one in the gritty world of Hollywood, the other in the dusty streets of South America, and both had earned respect through hard work and authenticity. Commentators marveled at how fate had brought them together, however briefly, and sparked a moment that would resonate far beyond either of their expectations. In the midst of all this, Pope Robert remained steadfastly focused on his mission. While the world debated Clint's prediction, he quietly prepared for the challenges ahead. His first public address as Pope reflected the same humility and determination that had defined him throughout his life. Speaking from the heart, he acknowledged the weight of his new role but promised to lead with courage and compassion. "We are called not to cling to the past," he said, "but to walk boldly toward the future, guided by love and faith." His words struck a chord with listeners around the globe. Even those who weren't Catholic found themselves moved by his sincerity. For many, it felt like a fresh start, a chance to see the Church embrace change without losing sight of its core values. And as Pope Robert stepped into his new responsibilities, one question lingered in the minds of millions. Could Clint Eastwood's bold prediction truly come true? Or was it simply a fortunate turn of phrase that had captured the world's imagination? Only time would tell. But for now, the story of the Hollywood icon and the humble Pope had everyone talking and waiting to see what would happen next. Pope Robert didn't waste any time settling into his new role. From the moment he stepped into the Vatican, it was clear that this wasn't going to be a typical papacy. He wasn't there to maintain the status quo or keep things running as they always had. Instead, he came with a vision, a bold and daring plan to reshape the Church in ways that would make it more relevant to the modern world. And within weeks of taking office, he began rolling out changes that left everyone talking. 1. Of his first moves was perhaps the most surprising. In a landmark address delivered to a packed St. Peter's Square, Pope Robert announced that the Church needed to do better when it came to inclusivity. For decades, debates about LGBTQ+ Catholics had simmered beneath the surface, often met with silence or resistance from leadership. But Pope Robert refused to shy away from the topic. Every person deserves to feel loved and accepted by God, he declared, his voice steady and unwavering. We must open our hearts wider and ensure that no one feels excluded from the embrace of the Church. The reaction was explosive. Progressive Catholics cheered the move, calling it long overdue. Many younger believers, who had drifted away from the Church over issues like these, started reconsidering their relationship with their faith. Social media flooded with messages of gratitude and hope. "Finally, someone gets it," read one viral tweet. "This is the kind of leadership we've been waiting for." But not everyone was pleased. Traditionalists within the Church pushed back fiercely, accusing Pope Robert of straying too far from centuries-old teachings. Some high-ranking cardinals even went so far as to call his statements reckless, warning that they could undermine the moral authority of the institution. Critics outside the Church joined in, arguing that his reforms were too radical and risked alienating core followers. Despite the backlash, Pope Robert stood firm. He followed up his initial announcement with concrete actions. Within months, he established committees tasked with studying how the Church could become more welcoming to marginalized groups. He also called for greater transparency in handling abuse scandals, another issue that had plagued the Church for years. Under his leadership, victims' voices were finally given a platform, and steps were taken to hold offenders accountable. It was a painful process, but Pope Robert believed it was necessary for healing to begin. As these changes unfolded, Clint Eastwood found himself once again at the center of the conversation. Media outlets couldn't resist revisiting his earlier prediction, framing it as almost prophetic. Clips of him saying, "If there's anyone who can change the face of the Church, it's you," played on repeat during news segments. Journalists speculated endlessly about whether Clint had somehow known what was coming. Had he seen something in Pope Robert that others had missed? Or was it simply a lucky guess? For his part, Clint remained quiet. He avoided giving interviews and stayed out of the spotlight. But curiosity got the better of reporters, and eventually, someone managed to catch him off guard while he was leaving a local cafe. When asked about his thoughts on Pope Robert's early reforms, Clint paused for a moment, adjusting his sunglasses, before responding. "I don't claim to know anything special," he said gruffly. "I just trust my instincts. And when I met him, I knew he was different." His response only added fuel to the fire. Fans of both men began connecting the dots, weaving theories about fate and intuition. Some joked that Clint should start a side career as a fortune teller, while others argued that his comment proved he had a deeper understanding of human nature than most gave him credit for. Whatever the case, the connection between the Hollywood legend and the spiritual leader continued to captivate audiences worldwide. Amidst all the buzz, Pope Robert kept pushing forward. One of his boldest initiatives came when he convened a historic summit aimed at addressing climate change. The event brought together scientists, environmental activists, and religious leaders from across the globe. It was an ambitious project, blending science and spirituality in a way that hadn't been attempted before. Pope Robert framed it as a moral imperative, urging humanity to take responsibility for the planet. "God has entrusted us with this earth," he said during the opening ceremony. "It is our duty to protect it, not just for ourselves but for future generations." The summit received widespread praise, especially from younger generations who had grown disillusioned with traditional institutions. Here was a pope who wasn't afraid to tackle real-world problems head-on. His message resonated deeply, inspiring many to re-engage with the church. Youth groups sprang up in cities around the world, organizing cleanup drives, planting trees, and spreading awareness about sustainable living. For the first time in years, the Catholic Church felt like a force for positive change. Of course, not everything went smoothly. Resistance from conservative factions within the church grew stronger as Pope Robert pressed ahead with his reforms. Protests erupted in several countries, with some believers threatening to leave the church altogether. Critics accused him of prioritizing popularity over doctrine, claiming that his progressive agenda was diluting the essence of Catholicism. Tensions ran high, and there were moments when it seemed like the entire institution might fracture under the pressure. Through it all, Pope Robert remained calm and composed. He acknowledged the challenges openly, admitting that change was never easy. In one particularly moving speech, he reminded everyone that growth often comes with discomfort. "Faith isn't about staying comfortable," he said. "It's about stepping into the unknown, trusting that God will guide us through. If we want to remain relevant, we must be willing to evolve." Clint Eastwood watched these developments from afar, his interest piqued by the unfolding drama. Though he didn't say much publicly, those close to him reported that he followed the news closely. Friends claimed he occasionally muttered comments like, "That guy's got guts," or "He's proving me right." Whether or not Clint truly believed he had predicted Pope Robert's success, it was clear that he respected the man's determination. By the end of Pope Robert's first 6 months in office, his impact was undeniable. Membership numbers began to rise, charitable efforts expanded globally, and discussions around previously taboo topics gained traction. Even skeptics had to admit that something remarkable was happening. The church was changing, and it was doing so in ways that inspired both admiration and debate. For millions of people, the story of Pope Robert's rise and Clint Eastwood's mysterious prediction had become a symbol of hope. It showed that even in a world divided by differences, individuals with courage and conviction could spark meaningful transformation. As the months passed, anticipation grew. What would Pope Robert do next? And would Clint Eastwood's words continue to ring true? The world waited eagerly to find out. As Pope Robert's papacy entered its second year, the momentum behind his reforms only grew stronger. His bold moves had already made headlines, but now they were starting to reshape the very fabric of the Catholic Church, and in some ways, the world itself. People who had once felt disconnected from religion were finding their way back, inspired by a leader who seemed genuinely committed to making the church a force for good. At the same time, those who opposed him dug in their heels, determined to resist what they saw as dangerous changes. The clash between tradition and progress became more intense than ever, turning Pope Robert's journey into a global spectacle. One of the most striking examples of this tension came when Pope Robert announced plans to host an unprecedented interfaith summit at the Vatican. Unlike anything the Church had done before, the event brought together not just leaders from Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, but also representatives from Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and indigenous spiritual traditions. The goal was simple yet ambitious: to foster greater understanding and cooperation among different faiths in tackling shared challenges like poverty, war, and climate change. The idea sparked both excitement and controversy. Supporters hailed it as a groundbreaking step toward unity, while critics accused Pope Robert of diluting the uniqueness of Catholic teachings. Some conservative voices within the Church went so far as to call the summit heretical, claiming that inviting non-Christian leaders to such a prominent platform undermined the church's identity. Despite the backlash, Pope Robert stood firm. "Faith is not about exclusion," he said during a press conference ahead of the event. "It's about love, compassion, and working together to build a better world." When the day of the summit arrived, thousands gathered in St. Peter's Square, eager to witness history. Inside the grand halls of the Vatican, delegates from diverse backgrounds sat side by side, sharing stories, prayers, and ideas. It was a powerful moment, one that transcended religious boundaries and reminded everyone present of their shared humanity. For many attendees, it was the first time they had engaged in meaningful dialogue with people from other faiths. By the end of the summit, several initiatives had been launched, including joint efforts to combat human trafficking and promote education in underserved communities. The ripple effects of the summit were felt far beyond Rome. News outlets around the globe covered the event extensively, highlighting its significance in a world often divided by religious differences. Social media buzzed with reactions, ranging from heartfelt praise to heated debates. Younger generations in particular responded positively, seeing Pope Robert as a bridge builder rather than a divider. Many began attending local churches again, curious to see how his message of inclusivity played out on a grassroots level. Meanwhile, Clint Eastwood found himself drawn further into the narrative. As Pope Robert's influence grew, so did interest in Clint's earlier prediction. Clips of him calling Archbishop Prevost destined for greatness continued to circulate online, sparking endless discussions. Some fans joked that Clint should start a podcast where he predicted future events, while others speculated whether he might have some kind of hidden talent for spotting potential in people. Whatever the case, the connection between the Hollywood icon and the Pope remained a source of fascination. Clint, however, stayed true to his private nature. He rarely gave interviews, and when he did, he kept his answers short and matter-of-fact. During one rare appearance on a late-night talk show, the host pressed him about his thoughts on Pope Robert's recent achievements. Clint leaned back in his chair, squinting thoughtfully, and replied, "I've met a lot of people in my life, and I can tell you this, he's the real deal. You don't forget someone like that." The audience erupted in applause, and the clip quickly went viral. While Clint avoided the spotlight, others weren't shy about weighing in. Religious scholars, political analysts, and cultural commentators all chimed in, offering their takes on Pope Robert's impact. Some praised him as a visionary leader unafraid to challenge the status quo, while others warned that his reforms could alienate traditionalists and fracture the church. Debates raged on television panels, radio shows, and social media threads, keeping the story alive in the public consciousness. Back in the Vatican, Pope Robert pressed on, undeterred by the noise surrounding him. One of his next major initiatives focused on addressing mental health issues within the church. Recognizing that many priests, nuns, and laypeople struggled silently with anxiety, depression, and burnout, he launched a program to provide training and resources for mental wellness. He also encouraged open conversations about mental health, breaking down the stigma that had long prevented people from seeking help. "Our faith calls us to care for one another, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually as well," he said during a sermon. "No one should suffer alone." This move struck a chord with millions. In an era where mental health awareness was becoming increasingly important, Pope Robert's decision to prioritize it within the church resonated deeply. Support groups sprang up in parishes worldwide, offering safe spaces for people to share their struggles. Stories poured in from individuals who said they finally felt seen and supported by their faith community. Even skeptics admitted that this was a step in the right direction. Of course, not everything went smoothly. Resistance from conservative factions within the church intensified, with some openly defying Pope Robert's directives. A handful of bishops refused to implement his policies, arguing that they contradicted long-standing doctrines. Others organized protests outside cathedrals, holding signs that read, "Return to tradition," or "Save our church." Tensions escalated to the point where rumors swirled about possible schisms, a prospect that worried even Pope Robert's strongest supporters. Through it all, Pope Robert maintained his calm demeanor. He listened to criticism without anger, acknowledging the fears and concerns of those who opposed him. In a poignant address delivered during a particularly turbulent period, he reminded everyone that disagreement was natural, but so was growth. "We are called to be a family of believers," he said, "and families sometimes argue, but if we stay grounded in love and humility, we will find a way forward together." His words offered a glimmer of hope to those caught in the middle of the debate. Even some critics softened their stance, admitting that while they didn't agree with all of his reforms, they respected his willingness to engage in dialogue. Slowly but surely, cracks began to heal, though the road ahead remained uncertain. As the months passed, it became clear that Pope Robert's papacy was unlike anything the world had seen before. He wasn't just leading a religious institution, he was inspiring a movement. From environmental activism to mental health advocacy, his initiatives touched lives in profound ways. And through it all, Clint Eastwood's prediction lingered in the background, a reminder of the serendipitous moment that had set this extraordinary chapter in motion. For millions of people, the story of Pope Robert and Clint Eastwood had become more than just news. It was a testament to the power of vision, courage, and faith. Whether you believed in fate or coincidence, one thing was undeniable. Something remarkable was happening. And as the world watched, anticipation built for what might come next. The backlash against Pope Robert's reforms reached a fever pitch as his second year in office unfolded. While millions celebrated the changes he had brought to the church, others dug in their heels, determined to resist what they saw as a betrayal of centuries-old traditions. The divide between progressives and traditionalists widened, creating a rift that threatened to tear the Catholic Church apart. For every step forward, it seemed there was an equal pushback, a reminder that change, no matter how well-intentioned, rarely comes without struggle. One of the most visible signs of this resistance came in the form of protests. In cities across Europe, North America, and parts of Africa, conservative Catholics took to the streets, holding rallies outside cathedrals and parish halls. Some carried banners with slogans like "Preserve our faith" or "No to modernization." Others held rosaries aloft, praying aloud for what they called a return to orthodoxy. These demonstrations weren't just symbolic, they were loud, passionate, and at times confrontational. In one particularly tense incident, protesters gathered outside St. Peter's Basilica during a major mass led by Pope Robert himself. As the service began, chants echoed through the square, drowning out parts of the liturgy. Security teams worked quickly to maintain order, but the disruption sent shockwaves through the Vatican. Critics seized on the moment, accusing Pope Robert of alienating core believers and destabilizing the church. Even some moderate voices within the clergy expressed concern, warning that the growing unrest could spiral out of control. Despite the mounting pressure, Pope Robert refused to back down. If anything, he doubled down on his vision, addressing the controversy head-on in a landmark speech delivered to a packed audience in St. Peter's Square. Standing behind the ornate balcony where he had first greeted the world as Pope, he spoke with a calm authority that silenced even his harshest critics, for a moment at least. "Faith is not about clinging to the past," he said, his voice steady and clear. "It is about embracing hope for the future. Yes, we honor our traditions, but we must also remember why those traditions exist: to serve humanity, to spread love, and to bring us closer to God. We cannot allow fear to hold us back from doing what is right." His words resonated deeply with many who had supported his reforms from the start. For them, this was more than just a defensive policy. It was a call to action, a reminder that faith should inspire courage rather than complacency. Social media erupted with messages of solidarity as people shared clips of the speech alongside heartfelt comments. "This is why I believe in him," one post read. "He's not afraid to stand up for what matters." But the battle wasn't over. Traditionalist factions within the church escalated their efforts, launching campaigns to undermine Pope Robert's authority. A group of senior cardinals issued a public letter questioning several of his decisions, accusing him of straying too far from core teachings. They demanded greater transparency in how reforms were being implemented and called for a halt to initiatives they deemed controversial. The letter made headlines around the globe, reigniting debates about whether Pope Robert's leadership was sustainable in the long term. Amidst all the turmoil, Clint Eastwood found himself once again thrust into the spotlight. As Pope Robert faced increasing scrutiny, media outlets revisited the Hollywood legend's earlier prediction, framing it as both prescient and provocative. Clips of Clint's remarks resurfaced yet again, sparking new rounds of speculation. Was his comment still valid given the challenges Pope Robert now faced? Or had the situation grown too complicated for anyone to foresee? Clint, ever the enigmatic figure, remained largely silent. When asked about the ongoing drama during a rare interview, he offered only a cryptic response. "I've always trusted my gut," he said, leaning back in his chair with a wry smile. "And my gut told me that guy was special. What happens next? Time will tell." His answer left room for interpretation, fueling further curiosity among fans and skeptics alike. For Pope Robert, the road ahead required resilience, not just in facing external opposition, but in navigating internal divisions within the Vatican itself. Behind closed doors, tensions simmered as advisors debated the best way forward. Some urged caution, arguing that moving too quickly could fracture the institution beyond repair. Others pushed for boldness, insisting that hesitation would only embolden critics and stall progress. It was a delicate balancing act, one that tested Pope Robert's leadership skills to their limits. Yet, through it all, he never lost sight of his ultimate goal: to create a church that reflected the needs of its people. He continued reaching out to marginalized communities, visiting prisons, refugee camps, and impoverished neighborhoods. During these trips, he often shared meals with locals, listening intently to their stories and concerns. His humility struck a chord with many, reinforcing the idea that he was a leader who truly cared about those he served. One such visit stood out in particular. Traveling to a remote village in South America, where he had once worked as a young priest, Pope Robert spent days living among the residents, sleeping in simple quarters and helping with daily chores. On the final evening, he addressed a gathering of villagers under the stars. With tears in his eyes, he thanked them for reminding him why he had dedicated his life to service. "You are the heart of the church," he said. "Not the buildings, not the rituals, but you. Never forget that." The moment went viral, capturing hearts around the world. For many, it was a powerful reminder of what made Pope Robert unique: his ability to connect with ordinary people on a deeply human level. Even some detractors softened their stance, admitting that his sincerity was hard to dismiss. As the year drew to a close, Pope Robert reflected on the journey so far in a candid interview with a prominent journalist. Asked about the challenges he had faced, he didn't shy away from acknowledging the difficulties. "Change is never easy," he admitted. "There are moments when I wonder if I'm doing enough, or if I'm doing the right thing. But then I think about the faces of the people I meet, the hopes they carry, and the dreams they share, and I know we have to keep going." His honesty struck a chord, earning praise even from unlikely corners. Critics who had once dismissed him as naive now grudgingly acknowledged his determination. Meanwhile, supporters rallied around him, doubling their efforts to promote his vision of a more inclusive and compassionate church. By the time the clock struck midnight on New Year's Eve, it was clear that Pope Robert's papacy had entered uncharted territory. The controversies hadn't disappeared. In fact, they showed no signs of fading anytime soon. But neither had his resolve. For millions of people watching from afar, the story of Pope Robert and Clint Eastwood's mysterious prediction remained a beacon of hope. It was proof that even in the face of adversity, courage and conviction could light the way forward. And as the calendar turned to a new year, anticipation built for what might come next. By the end of Pope Robert's first year in office, it was impossible to deny the impact he had made, not just on the Catholic Church, but on the world at large. His reforms, bold and controversial as they were, had sparked conversations that reached far beyond religious circles. People who had never set foot in a church found themselves drawn to his message of love, inclusion, and action. Others, skeptical at first, began to see glimpses of hope in a fractured society. And through it all, Clint Eastwood's prediction lingered in the background, a quiet thread connecting two seemingly unrelated worlds. The legacy Pope Robert was building wasn't without its scars. The resistance he faced hadn't disappeared. If anything, it had grown more entrenched. Traditionalists within the church continued to push back, organizing protests, writing scathing letters, and even threatening schism. Yet, for every voice raised against him, there were dozens more standing firmly by his side. Parishes that had once struggled with dwindling attendance now saw renewed energy, as younger generations returned to the fold inspired by his vision. Social media buzzed with stories of transformation, people sharing how Pope Robert's words and actions had reignited their faith or prompted them to take steps toward positive change. One of the most remarkable shifts came in the way people viewed the role of religion in addressing global issues. Under Pope Robert's leadership, the Vatican became a hub for tackling some of humanity's biggest challenges: poverty, climate change, and inequality. He convened summits, partnered with governments and NGOs, and encouraged local communities to take ownership of these efforts. In one particularly inspiring initiative, he launched a worldwide campaign to combat hunger, urging Catholics everywhere to contribute food, resources, or time to help those in need. The response was overwhelming, with millions participating and countless lives touched. As momentum built, so did recognition of Pope Robert's influence. Time magazine named him Person of the Year, calling him a leader unafraid to reimagine faith for the modern age. Newsweek hailed him as the Pope of Possibility, while other outlets highlighted his ability to bridge divides between tradition and progress. Even critics who disagreed with his methods admitted that his presence had reinvigorated debates about the future of religion in an increasingly secular world. For Clint Eastwood, the story took on a life of its own. As Pope Robert's achievements piled up, so did interest in Clint's earlier remarks. Clips of him predicting greatness for Archbishop Prevost resurfaced endlessly across platforms, becoming memes, hashtags, and even late-night comedy fodder. One popular sketch featured a mock psychic hotline, where Clint offered predictions about everything from sports outcomes to celebrity gossip, all delivered in his trademark, gravelly drawl. Audiences ate it up, laughing not just at the humor but at the uncanny timing of his original comment. Despite the attention, Clint remained characteristically low-key. When asked during a rare interview whether he still believed in his prediction, he chuckled softly before responding. "I said what I felt when I met him," Clint explained. "Sometimes you meet someone and you just know they're special. That's all it was, a gut feeling." It was a simple answer, but it resonated deeply. Fans admired his humility, seeing it as proof that even a Hollywood legend could recognize greatness when he saw it. Behind the scenes, however, Clint revealed a bit more in a memoir excerpt published months later. Reflecting on his encounter with Archbishop Prevost, he admitted that his prediction hadn't been entirely spontaneous. "You don't get to my age without learning to trust your instincts," he wrote. "When I sat down with him that day, something clicked. He wasn't trying to sell me anything or impress me. He was just being real. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to do." The connection between Clint Eastwood and Pope Robert became a symbol of something greater than either man individually. It was a reminder that moments of insight can come from the most unexpected places, and that fate has a funny way of weaving lives together in ways no one sees coming. For millions of people, their intertwined story served as a source of inspiration, proof that courage, authenticity, and belief in others could spark extraordinary change. As Pope Robert entered the second half of his first year, he focused on solidifying the foundations of his reforms. He traveled tirelessly, visiting countries torn apart by conflict, natural disasters, or economic hardship. Everywhere he went, he brought a message of unity and resilience. During one trip to a war-torn region in Africa, he spent hours speaking with refugees, listening to their stories of loss and survival. As he knelt beside a young boy who had lost both parents, tears streaming down his face, cameras captured the raw emotion of the moment. It was a stark reminder of why his mission mattered, not for headlines or accolades, but for the lives it touched. Back home, the Vatican worked to implement structural changes aimed at ensuring lasting impact. New committees were formed to oversee initiatives related to transparency, inclusivity, and environmental stewardship. Training programs were introduced to prepare clergy members for the evolving needs of their congregations. While some traditionalists grumbled about the pace of change, many welcomed the fresh direction, seeing it as a chance to breathe new life into the church. By the time Pope Robert marked the anniversary of his election, the world had changed in ways few could have predicted. Membership numbers showed a steady increase, especially among younger demographics. Charitable efforts expanded globally, reaching communities that had long been overlooked. Discussions about faith and morality grew richer, reflecting a broader understanding of what it meant to live compassionately in the modern era. And yet, the journey was far from over. Challenges remained: internal divisions, external criticism, and the daunting task of sustaining momentum in the face of uncertainty. But Pope Robert faced them with the same determination that had defined his papacy from the start. In a reflective address delivered on the anniversary, he reminded everyone of the importance of perseverance. "We are called to be builders of bridges, not walls," he said. "To walk this path is not easy, but it is necessary. Let us continue forward, guided by love and faith." His words echoed around the globe, leaving a lasting impression on those who heard them. For Clint Eastwood, watching from afar, it was validation of sorts, not of his prediction, but of the qualities he had seen in Pope Robert that day in Carmel by the sea. Authenticity, purpose, a willingness to stand up for what's right, even when the odds seem insurmountable. In the end, the story of Clint Eastwood's bold prediction and Pope Robert's transformative journey became more than just a tale of coincidence or prophecy. It was a testament to the power of human connection, intuition, and faith in shaping the course of history. Millions reflected on the improbable link between a Hollywood icon and a spiritual revolutionary, proof that sometimes truth really is stranger than fiction. And as the world looked to the future, one question lingered in the air: what would happen next? Whatever it was, it promised to be unforgettable.